So let's look at a quick example of checked exceptions. I kind of want to show you this so you can see how a checked exception operates. Well, I'm not going to really look at unchecked exceptions because we kind of already covered that in the try and catch. Basically, an unchecked exception, if you remember, you don't have to catch it. It's not going to cause a problem if you don't catch it. You can if you want to, and that's kind of what we did with this illegal argument exception. But a checked exception, remember, you have to catch this exception, or you have to say that you are going to rethrow that or throw that exception again. Or basically say that your method is going to throw that exception. So I'm going to show you a little bit of file I/O here. We are not really going to cover the file I/O, but I'm just going to show you this because I know that this method is going to throw a checked exception. So I'm going to create a file here using the file class, and we are going to do a new file, and then I'm going to specify this file will be ctest.txt, and we are going to try and create this file. You can call file.createNewFile to create a new file. Now what you will see happen here is, see, we have got this squiggly line in Eclipse, and it's telling us unhandled exception type IO exception. And since IO exception is a checked exception, we either have to add a throws declaration or surround with try and catch. And these quick fixes are pretty handy in Eclipse, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use both of these. So let's click add a throws declaration first. Now you can see here it's adding this throws to our method, and we can choose IO exception throwable. The more specific one is probably better here, so we will choose IO exception. And so now it lets us get away with this, but this is really a bad habit here. A lot of people will basically do this and then kind of ignore the exception in order to just write their code. It is telling you that it throws an exception. You should really try and handle it if you can. Now it's okay to throw it back up if you have some code that is going to handle it up the chain, and that's the more appropriate place. But what this is indicating when we put this at the end of a method is that this method is capable of throwing this exception, and it's kind of deferring that responsibility of catching the exception up the chain, if that makes sense. So the other alternative that we could do is we could actually catch this exception ourselves. So I will look at these quick fixes again, and I can surround this with a try catch, and you see it's auto generating this code for me. It's basically just wrapping our call inside of this try catch and catching this exception, and then it automatically prints the stock trace as default. But we could do something here, and we could actually even rethrow an exception, and I will show you this point real quick here while we are in this area of rethrowing an exception. The other thing that you can do, we saw here in the printer that we could basically catch an exception and print out a message. We could also rethrow an exception. So for example, we could take this IO exception and we could wrap this in a new exception, an exception class that we created that is more specific to what we are trying to do here. Maybe we created a printer exception, and I don't have one created, but let's just say we had a printer exception. We could do throw new printer exception, and then we could make this take our existing exception and then add some other message. And this is kind of a common pattern. I didn't want to get too into depth here since this is more of an introductory level course, but just so you know that this is out here, this is a good way that you can just rethrow an exception. If you can't do something really smart with the exception here, it's good to go ahead and catch it, but then maybe you have some more context that you can pass around here, and so you could throw a new exception that might mean something higher up the chain. But that's the basics of using a checked exception, is that if you use a checked exception or a class that throws a checked exception, you have either got to put this in the try catch block or you can add the throws at the end of your method.